Welcome to There She Is, the podcast by Women's Sport and Recreation Tasmania. This is a space for celebrating women in sport, the athletes, coaches, administrators, volunteers, and leaders who shape our sporting communities. We talk pathways, visibility, lived experience, and what works for women in sport right here in Tasmania and beyond, because representation matters and every story deserves to be seen. All right. Hello, everybody. It's Philippa here from Women's Sport and Recreation Tasmania. And today I'm delighted to introduce you to Margo Mountjoy, who is a bit of a legend in the sports medicine space. And thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from Canada.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you, Philippa.
I'm just going to give you a bit of a background about Margo, because she's clearly not Tasmanian, but she has an incredible wealth of knowledge in women and sport. So Margo has received her medical education and her family medicine training at the McMaster University in Canada, and her sports medicine specialty degree from KSIM. She's received a PhD from the VU University in Amsterdam and is a fellow of the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. In addition, she's acted as a national team physician for Synchro Canada, as well as the National Endurance Centre Training Centre athletes for middle and long distance track athletes, and the National Triathlon and Wrestling Team Training Centre. She currently consults for 4 international federations, including FIFA, International Golf, World Netball, and World Rugby. Her research focuses on elite athlete health and wellbeing, and she is the lead author of the IOC Consensus Statement on REDS. So incredible knowledge there. So I just wanted to start by asking what sort of drawn you and prompted you to have such a passionate interest for researching and support for women in sport?
Probably it stems back to the fact that I was a female athlete, elite athlete in sport. So I had a passion for sport from my own personal experience as an athlete. And then as a physician, I'd see gaps. I'd see lots of information, research being done on men, but very little being done on women. Half of my population were women athletes, elite athletes, and there was little that I could draw on. Often what we would do is I'd take the men's data and pink it and shrink it, we call it, and make it fit for women, which isn't fit for purpose.
Yeah, it's great to see so much research starting to turn and starting to change to support women. Because although we have a lot of similarities, our bodies respond quite differently, right?
Men are not little women. Women are not little men.
So REDS is obviously your little baby of research. Can you give us, in simple terms, what
so REDS
it actually
is an acronym that stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport, and it is a syndrome. It's a clinically, medically diagnosed syndrome, which happens to occur both physiological and psychological implications for exposure to that athlete to something we call problematic low energy availability. And what that is having not enough energy to meet the body's needs for function. And there's different reasons why those energy needs might not be met. And one of them might be restricted intake from someone with body image issues or a disordered eating or eating disorder, or being restricted by a coach for body physique changes, things like that. The other, and far more common in my practice of elite long-distance triathletes and runners, was not body image issues or eating disorders. It was that they had such high expenses of energy through exercise. They weren't keeping up, either through lack of knowledge or lack of access to food, just not knowing how to fuel around sport, and they were having energy, what we call problematic low energy availability, where they're not getting enough energy. And when the body's faced with not enough energy, it starts to shut down systems to try and preserve energy. And so it starts to shut down systems. And those are once the systems are shutting down, that's what we call REDS.
Right. And sort of what time frame does this typically happen over? Is it something that's quick or it builds up over years?
It can happen much shorter than years. It can happen within, days to weeks for early signs. And then some other body systems are more resistant to it and takes longer, so months to a year, for some of body systems to be affected. Different body systems have different time levels of how much they can tolerate this lack of energy or problematic low energy availability.
Right. And so what are we likely to see in the early days or weeks? Are there typical symptoms that show up first?
The first symptoms in both men and women, but more particularly in women, is change in the menstrual cycle. So the reproductive system. And if you think from a, adaptive physiological model, if we're not having enough energy around for the body to function, we don't have enough energy to grow another person. So reproduction is something that's not necessary for life. Reproductive system is the first system to shut down to conserve energy. So that would be a change in menstrual cycle, is what we've seen in women. Usually lack of menstruation or, less menstruation.
And so potentially for younger athletes who maybe aren't thinking about having children yet or are potentially excited about the idea of not having periods, what's the risk of us not having
Yeah,
a
no, it's
regular
a, it's a very
cycle?
important question because many young women prefer not to have their cycle, and it is something that maybe is desirable. It is not desirable from a health perspective, though. There can be long-term consequences. We're studying now the effect on future fertility, and we do know there are changes in pregnancy outcomes in women that have had REDS in the past. So there are potentially some long-term implications from the reproductive system. But we do know that if REDS continues, there can be irreversible bone damage and increased injuries, increased illnesses, decreased response to training. So not only is there physical problems, there can also be mental problems, mental outcomes, and there can also be performance outcomes. So most athletes, even though they might not want to have their periods, still want to have good sport performances. And if they want to have a good sport
Absolutely.
performance, having REDS is not conducive to that. The literature is very clear that people with REDS will not respond to the training stimulus, will have poor recovery, decreased muscle strength, decreased concentration, coordination. Performance is affected. And often for my athletes, that's the first presentation they had for me was my performance is off. My coach is sending me in for you to fix me, so to speak. There's many reasons for poor performance. REDS is not the only reason, but REDS is certainly one of them in a certain settings.
Yeah. I know when I was younger, I almost had this illusion that you'd hear a lot that elite athletes or great athletes would start missing their cycle. And it was almost put on this thing just going, oh, you must know you're an elite athlete at that point. And so it's great to see the awareness changing that that's not a healthy signal of being an
For sure.
excellent
It's a
athlete.
good, very good message. That's a good talking point. Losing your period is not a sign of being an elite athlete. It's a warning sign of danger, imminent injury, illness, and poor performance.
And so there's obviously a progression of symptoms that start to build up. What might we start to see after that if it's not
Yeah, I mean,
flagging
there's
for the
different
athlete?
athletes have different responses. And there is a colorful diagram in our REDS publications that shows all the different body systems that can be affected and different there's different presentations. Some have GI discomfort where they have cramping or changes in their bowels, and that's for some individuals very significant. And for others, it's cognitive or psychological changes where they have irritability, they may have mood changes, they may have anxiety, they may have decreased concentration. So it can be some psychological ones. A serious psychological one is it can actually cause an eating disorder in some instances, disordered eating, changes in behaviors with
Wow.
food. Well, that is a serious outcome. Illness, bone stress injuries, pretty common. Thinning of the bones, and that's not something you feel until you fracture. So
Yeah.
that's not a sign that athletes might recognize that physicians should be looking for, even in young people, because it can have lifelong implications because it's pretty hard to reverse it if it's not handled properly. So that is another sign and symptom. We will also see changes in lipid metabolism. So the cholesterol, the lipid metabolism would be off. Thyroid function could be off as well. Not normal. I mean, there's many, and I suggest you look at that colorful wheel. But not
Yeah.
everyone has all of them. It's a question of looking at that individual, asking about all those things. Urinary incontinence is another symptom that's associated with REDS as well. You need to put these things together, and usually a physician is the one who puts these things together and finds the syndrome that way.
Yeah. So it's obviously a combination of multiple symptoms coming together because individually they might look like
Sure.
something
And
else.
in fact, that's part of what a physician should do is when they see someone with a lack of menstrual period, first thing I do is pregnancy test because that's more common. And that's pretty common in the age group that I work with. So a good physician will take these signs and symptoms and say, oh, well, you're having bone stress injury. Let's look at your biomechanics. Let's look at your bone health. And then let's look at REDS. So it's important that you have a good medical diagnosis with this.
And how widely known is REDS generally if you were going to see your GP? Is this something that's going to pop up
Well, I
as
hope
something that's
so.
common
We're
for them?
certainly teaching in medical education in Canada. I hope it's being taught in your part of the world as well. I suspect that it's not as widely spread as we'd like it to be.
So what can we do to prevent this? What are the essential things that we can pick up as an athlete or as a coach that are going to make sure that we're not heading
Yeah, I
down
think
this
that's a
path?
very good. How do we prevent it? Primary prevention of REDS. And it's not difficult to prevent. It's making sure that you're fueling your sport appropriately. And if you think of it like a car, if you don't put gasoline in the car, it's not going to go. And food is our gasoline. And in particular, carbohydrate is what your muscle uses. So we do need an appropriate amount of carbohydrate as well as micronutrients and macronutrients to fuel sport. So what I work with the teams over the years doing is making sure that they understand about having food before they train in the morning. They have recovery food after they train. They have food spread out through the day and around training, and that it's appropriate food. Having a bag of chips, probably not good food to fuel your sport, but having a post workout half a bagel with some peanut butter is probably much better. Having chocolate milk. I mean, having something that's nutrient dense and energy rich is good, and carbohydrates are needed. They're not bad. They are needed. Our muscle uses carbohydrate, and we're exercising our muscle. So carbs are not bad.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of focus, particularly on protein at the moment, which is obviously still important, but we need a good base of
Absolutely. And protein is
carbohydrates,
important
right?
for muscle. There's no question. Muscle repair, but it's carbs that works for muscle and for endurance sport.
And so is it really important for athletes to work with a doctor or a nutritionist to see exactly what the intake requirement is? Because it's obviously going to be different for
Definitely
different
different
training
for different
loads.
training loads. You know, the difference of nutrition for an archer or a shooter versus an ultra marathoner, very different. So you need to work with someone who understands. So what we recommend is at the development level, there's an understanding of healthy, balanced diets, healthy body image, nutrition for training. And then as they become more elite, they can have more sophistication of understanding the difference between carbs and proteins and multivitamins and minerals. And then at the very elite level only is working with a dietitian to actually map out and fuel. Because food isn't just a fuel, it's actually social as well. It's pleasure, it's time with family, it's time with friends, it's enjoyment. And that love of food should not be lost because we're counting this many carbs for this much of an exercise. Like that becomes cumbersome and difficult. And I think it's important that people recognize that food is much more than just a fuel, but at the very elite level, you've got to make sure you have enough fuel in the tank.
I love that approach. Sometimes in the back of our mind, especially in the female space, we can be really conscious of our weight. And as much as we are changing the language about that and trying to be more body positive, sometimes it still creeps into our minds, and athletes might think that if they're lighter, they can go faster. How do you support athletes with finding that balance between, healthy body image and their performance as
I think
well?
it's very important that your listeners realize and recognize that nobody wins a medal in sport for being skinny. So that's first and foremost. It's just not about appearance. I mean, there's some sports that are judged sports where appearance indirectly may influence the marketing, but should not if judges are being appropriate in how they are marking things. But that is not what gets the medal. It's the performance. And the performance is what's important. So you need to fuel your body to meet those performance outcomes and needs. And I think that's really important. Part of it also is being conscious of how we are measuring body composition in sport. We shouldn't be measuring skin folds or fat folds or DEXA scans in young immature athletes as they're growing. It's not recommended. It's only recommended at the very elite levels, at the Olympic level of certain sports. Should we be measuring body composition and being precise about it? There's no question, and I agree, that in elite athletes, if we can bring their body composition to a lower level where they're a little bit lighter just for the period of time of the competition, it can enhance their performance. There's no question, but that is the very tip of the iceberg, the very select individual, not for the general population at all.
Yeah, that's a great like, what is it, like 3% of the
Or
population
even less.
performing at these crazy levels that these rules are not applying to us, so we can put away those
Put away the
calipers.
calipers and just enjoy food.
So for the average athlete, whether that's a mum or someone who's training sort of at club level, what message do you think they need to hear about their approach or tweaks that
I
they
think
can
it's
make?
important for them to be aware that they get a healthy, balanced diet. You need to have calcium. You need to have, if you don't drink milk, have calcium fortified orange juice. Make sure that you have a good fruits and vegetables, that you have a good carbohydrate base, and that you fuel it around their sport. People who go out and run 2 hours before they have breakfast, running on an empty tank. It's not okay. And people who have breakfast, but then they, train and then they go around their busy day and then they train at night and then they have dinner and they have a whole days of nutrients at night. It's not okay either. So it's balancing around the day, around training, and being sensitive and sensible. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, awesome. And I think sometimes those tiny tweaks and changes rather than trying to switch everything around at once, if you are eating a lot in the evening and not a lot across during the day, then maybe it's working on one meal or one
Yeah,
space at a time.
absolutely.
Yeah. So bone density is obviously something that comes up a lot with this. And I believe during the perimenopause and menopause phase, that's also a higher risk time where or looking after our bones is of higher importance. Is there any different approach people in that phase should do? Because does that compound the
No,
risk
not
with
really. I
REDS?
mean, Reds isn't about age and it's not about energy. And you can have good energy balance at menopause and still have thinning of your bones, mainly from the lack of estrogen, not related to Reds. It's related to age. So, we need to disconnect in our mind that's that risk. Frankly, the thinning of the bones at menopause is related to how much bone you laid down as a teenager. And that's what's most important is how much bone you have as a teenager. When those are often our athletes that maybe are not following a proper diet. And if you don't lay the bone down by the time you're 18 or 19, it's going to be pretty hard to gain it later. So those teenage years of when the
Right.
bone grows, its density is critical that we have absolutely good energy intake, calcium, vitamin D intake, etc. Really critical that teenage years. That's what's going to affect bone health as a menopausal woman.
Right. And so is there anything as coaches or administrators in the club that we can do if building that bone is most important and keeping energy high across all ranges is great, but particularly in that adolescent space? Do you talk about language changes or what can the coach do to change the culture or change the message
Coaches
that's
are
happening with
really
these
important in
athletes?
an athlete's life, probably more important than parents, depending on the sport culture. So coaches play a significant role in maintaining health. And the teams that I've worked with over the years, I wouldn't work with the team unless the coach was on board in terms of the nutrition and fueling aspects of things. So coaches can be very important from the coach saying, okay, we're going to have a nutritionist come in and talk to the club today. Come on in. And so the coach is saying it's important. If the coach is saying it's important, and they might pay the nutritionist a tiny amount just to come in and spend some time with the team and talk about fueling, but that speaks volumes to those young people. So having the coach understand the importance and actually doing something to demonstrate the importance is really powerful for young people.
And do you find that that shift is happening? Are most coaches getting on board and supporting, great nutrition across their teams?
Of course, it varies. Some people say, well, when I was an athlete, this is how my coach coached me, so that's how I'm going to coach. So there's some cultures in sport that are stuck in old ways, but most coaches nowadays are trying to improve what they do by learning from the coaching science. And I do get invitations to talk to coaches about REDS.
Do you have any message for sports that may have a weight element? So whether it's like a cox in a rowing boat or a jockey or someone who's in boxing where they do have to potentially weigh in
Well,
for
you've
that
just
sport?
identified some of the at-risk sports. And we talked earlier about judge sports and high energy sort of train and load sports. But the other sports at risks are those where they have to weigh in or where power to weight ratio is affected. A lightweight rower, a coxswain, a jockey, those people, cyclists, also the power to weight ratio is very critical. And also some of those are long distance too. So they're high endurance. So rowing and cycling are long distance, wrestling not so endurance, but making weight is what the challenge is. So for them, it's really important that they ensure that they're trying to maintain their weight throughout like a healthy weight throughout their training season. And they can maybe lower their weight just for the competition without running into difficulties. Very important to make sure they're fueling their sport through the proper energy, macro and micronutrients, proteins that we've mentioned already, but they are at higher risk. And working with a dietitian in those sports is important because there's some crazy culture around making weight in weight category sports. The responsibility also lies with sports. The
Mm.
IOC recently is just, I believe, affecting the weight categories in and ultra weight rowing, I think, is not as so supported as it once was. So trying to decrease the pressure on the athlete to be smaller and thin. Ski jumping did a very nice rule change where the lighter you are, of course, the further you fly, right? It's gravity, it's physics. So I know you don't maybe do a lot of ski jumping in Tasmania, but in many of the countries, there was very thin people because they could fly further. And so what Ski Federation did was the lighter you were, the shorter your ski. So that this advantage of being lighter, the advantage of being
Interesting.
lighter was negated. So it tried to negate the benefit of being lighter. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. There must be so many other creative ways that different sports can
Yeah, sport
take that on
climbing right
board.
now actually has an eligibility rule. Pre-season, they must, at the very, very elite level, submit documentation of health to show that they don't have REDS, and then they're licensed for the year. And then there's spot checks throughout the year to make sure they've maintained their healthy health. And if they're not found to be, their license to compete is revoked. So that's another sport that's done
Yeah.
some rule changes to try and protect the health of the athlete.
Well, it'll be interesting to see the space and see which other sports jump on board and and protect the athletes in that form too. What else? What if you could give our listeners one key message to look after their health and their energy and prevent REDs? What
Gosh,
would
I
that
think we
be?
mentioned a nice soundbite earlier that I'll probably reiterate that nobody wins a medal for being thin. You win a medal for your sport performance. And I think that's an important key message. Really important also to know that sport performance is you have to fuel your performance and you have to fuel it properly. Pre and post, and then throughout the day, the energy balance throughout the day. So that's really critical.
I
I
think
think
I
there's
should need
another
to
key
cover here.
message that's important that there's different. So a younger athlete is more susceptible than a more mature woman. So if we look at a teenager versus a woman in her 20s versus a woman in her 30s, the younger woman is more susceptible to REDS than a woman who's a little bit older. So we have to pay special attention to our teenagers, our young people, because of that. Also because of their window of bone growth during adolescence. And so a person over
Mm.
time will change their ability to adapt to low energy availability. So a woman in their 30s can maybe tolerate it a little better than a woman in their who's 17 or 18.
And do you think it's a with the young athletes? Is it a
I
maturity
know. I
or a
think it's
body
probably
image thing, or is it
physiology.
just
The body
physiology?
systems aren't as well set. And
Yeah.
woman to woman. So you might have two women eating the same and in the same training program, and one will have trouble and the other one won't. And that's because we're not all the same and we have different tolerances and different tolerance levels. So you kind of think, well, I should be fine because all my teammates are fine. How come I'm not? Well, you're not the same as everyone else. So it can vary from individual as
Yeah.
well within their lifespan, but also from individual to individual.
Yeah, excellent. So, tiredness and decreased performance, besides losing your period, are other key indicators that we'd be
Yes,
looking
some
for?
people notice mental health changes, irritability. Some people notice stress urinary incontinence. Some people get injured, and that's one of their signs and symptoms. Maybe bone stress injuries are fairly common in high endurance sports. Depending on what sport it is, if it's a rower, they may have bone stress injury in their rib. If they're a runner, it might be in their shins or feet. So there's different presentations, vary depending on the sport.
And they're going to be extended. So, if it's a mood shift, for example, it's not just going to be over one session, they might see it over
Oh, for sure,
more than a
for
week.
sure. It's over
Yeah.
usually months,
Yeah.
month or more.
Yeah. So if these sort of symptoms are persisting and the athlete's not recognizing it, then definitely the coach should be stepping in and if they've
Yeah.
noticed an
And the
ongoing
coach may see
pattern.
changes in training.
Yeah.
Like they'll say, you're just not performing the way you should be. How come you're not getting faster? Or there may be other signs that they're just not, it's not necessarily an injury. It might be that they're just not performing as expected.
Well, thank you so much for enlightening us on all of this. It's I'm sure it's a tip of the iceberg, but the more we can prevent it and be aware of it from the get-go is great. Is there any tips once we're sort of in it? Maybe you've got some help with a doctor or a nutritionist. Is there anything that
Oh,
gets us out
gosh.
of it quicker?
It took a long time to get into this state. It doesn't go away overnight. So I think it's having the patience to know that you're doing the right thing. And it just takes time for the
Sure.
body to trust and to revert to newer behaviors and habits. So it takes time. It took months probably to get into that state. So don't expect it to go away overnight. So be patient, keep working on it, and you'll notice the difference over time.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It's been really helpful. If you want to follow Margo, she's on Instagram and see some of the other research and work that she's doing. We really value your expertise and the incredible support you're giving women in the
Thank you.
sporting
A pleasure.
space. If this episode resonated with you, if you believe in visibility, representation, and strong pathways for women in sport, we invite you to join us. Women's Sport and Recreation Tasmania is a growing community of state sporting bodies, clubs, women, and allies working together to make sport more inclusive, connected, and supportive across our state. By becoming a WSRT member, you're helping amplify women's voices, stories, and leadership, both on the field and behind the scenes. Head to wsrt.org.au/membership to learn more about becoming a member. Because when we can see women in sport, we can be them.